Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inspiring Hope, the show that brings uplifting voices and meaningful stories to light. I'm your host, Lois Hermann, and today I am truly honored to welcome two remarkable individuals whose lives embody courage, service, resilience, and heart. Retired General Don Bolduc and is a highly decorated Special Forces commander who has devoted more than 3 decades to serving our country. His story is not only one of extraordinary leadership, but of integrity, healing, and a deep commitment to helping veterans and their families thrive. Joining him in voice is his wonderful wife, Sharon, a woman whose strength, grace, and unwavering support have been an anchor through years of deployments, transitions, and life-changing missions. Together, they bring a powerful message of perseverance, partnership, and hope. It's truly a privilege to have them with us today. General Don Bolduc and Sharon Bolduc, welcome to Inspiring Hope.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I know I appreciate it. And Sharon?
Hello. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I love that you've got the picture of the two of you in the background because you're traveling, so you're not in your normal office and your background is going to be a little different. But there's a beautiful picture of the two of you.
Yes, there is. It's a wonderful picture and a wonderful memory of when Sharon and I were stationed in Germany. At the time of this photo, I was the operations officer for Africa Command, a job that I truly enjoyed. And we are at the military ball, which combines U.S. Africa Command and U.S. European Command. And it's a wonderful night, to share camaraderie and to get the military families together and to recognize all the hard work that's done by the people that serve our great nation.
Wonderful. And where were you stationed in Germany, if I might ask?
Yeah, so we were in Stuttgart and we were at Kelly Barracks, where United States AFRICOM is headquartered. Mm-hmm. And so it's a small base, quaint. Everybody knows each other, which is very nice. And, the European theater was significantly downsized in the 90s. And so a lot of these small bases were consolidated to be 4-star command headquarters. And, we had the honor to serve there. We stayed there 4 years. I had 2 assignments. The first was the operations officer for Africa Command, as I mentioned. And then the second was my division command level responsibility as Special Operations Command Africa Commander, which was one of my most rewarding assignments in my career. And it happened to be my last assignment before I retired.
Mm. And so as you look back, what were the significant moments that shaped you as a leader and as a human being and in your career? What stands out the most for you?
Well, I think what stands out was the beginning of my career, which I started out as an enlisted soldier, a private, had the opportunity to serve as a sergeant, a squad leader in 2nd Airborne Division, which I think shaped not only my warfighting skills, but my understanding of leadership and how to be a servant leader and discipline and self that took. A real understanding and commitment and values of our nation and the importance of the oath that we took. And then I decided that, I wanted to carry that over into a career as an officer. So, I did that. And then I had the privilege and the honor to meet Sharon at college. We were in the same ROTC program together, and we got married. And of course, that was, having a family, having a wife, having that responsibility, and then having children, I think was very formative. And, when you take the oath to your nation, you put so many people ahead of yourself. Mm-hmm. When you have a family, you now put yourself last. Your family always comes first. Mm-hmm. And so I think what I learned and what was most formative to me is the commitment to public service and the selflessness that takes, and the constant reminding of yourself that helping people and doing things for other people is the most rewarding thing that can happen to you in your life. And if you can seek those opportunities and take advantage of them, your life will end up being more rewarding in the end. And so, being an enlisted man, being a sergeant, getting married, and having 37 years with my wife Sharon, 3 boys, 3 grandchildren. We have a 4th one on the way now, which I'm very excited to see in the springtime baby. So that'll be nice. It'll be a little boy. And, just those things. And then, constantly being reminded with every opportunity of responsibility that you're given, just how important these things are in being able to, help others and, what you can give back. My brother, who followed me in his career, asked me one time what was the most important thing about being a battalion commander. And I told him that it's not the receiving of the colors when you become the commander. It's how you help your people after you pass those colors on to somebody else. Mm. And the mark that you make will be determined on the men and women that you served and what they ask of you after you give up command. Because while you're in command, you're the person that they're focused on. Mm-hmm. But after command, if they have respect for you, they will reach out to you to help them with letters of recommendation, whether it's for a job in the military or whether it's school, or they will reach out to you if they're having problems and they need some advice. And those things I find to be the most rewarding about being a leader. It's not so much the time you spent as a leader, but it's the effect that you had on them and the faith and confidence that they have in you after you've moved on. And so I find those to be very rewarding, and it's why Sharon and I have dedicated ourselves after retirement to helping veterans in any way that we can.
Wonderful. Yes. What's interesting is that I have such a great respect that you were private, sergeant, and then into officer. My dad had the same path. He ended up retiring as a chief warrant officer, and he was Mr. K, and his men loved him. I mean, he was really dedicated. Now this was back in the post World War II, so he was 40s, 50s, 60s era. But I remember how much the impact that he made and how dedicated he was. And that was an impact on me as a child growing up with someone who was so devoted to our nation, to our country, to doing what's right for other people. So thank you for that. And I feel like when you have risen through those ranks, because I too worked for the military in the medical community, and many of the doctors, for instance, came in as higher ranking officers, and they didn't work their way up. They didn't always have the same attitude toward the people as someone who had been there and experienced the different levels of rank in the military. So I'm sure that was a huge shape.
I love that point you make, because not that I'm saying my path is the preferred path or the right path, but I do believe that officers that have been enlisted soldiers first bring a perspective that benefits them in their leadership later. I have a firm belief in that. Not to take away from other commissioning sources like, West Point and ROTC, but, the OCS program that, the Army has at Fort Benning that takes non-commissioned officers and turns them into second lieutenants, I think is probably one of the most functional commissioning sources. However, you don't see people from commissioning sources, taking it to the highest levels of general officer rank, unless they've gone to the academy or whatever. And
Yeah.
that's disappointing to me, but that's the way our culture and our society has defined it. That somehow you go to an academy, and that's kind of like the blessing, and then you move up the ranks. And so I think that those that take that journey as enlisted first, have a much different perspective on leadership and the importance of the men and women that they serve. We look at it that way, right? We serve them. Mm-hmm. We understand the rank, we understand the structure, we understand the command. However, we work for them. And I think that's a distinction that is sometimes lost among leaders, and it's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. And you're serving them because you have been them. You understand. It's to me, it's similar to going to college a little bit later in life. After you've experienced life, or after you've experienced a part of a career, then you go to college to learn the skills in order to expand your knowledge in that career. And so many people who start young in college are not really more aware of what they want to do, so they're just going through the motions. You're basically, what you did was you applied your knowledge and to your learning and expanded. I would like to have Sharon jump in here. I know she's sitting right here, but you walked this journey alongside him. What was it like supporting this, private to sergeant to special forces officer through deployments and transitions and homecoming? What helped you stay strong?
I mean, a couple things. We had a very strong military community, in the special operations community. We were very close, sort of your family away from home. I think that's true more in special ops just because it's a smaller community, and we do make a point to do things when the guys are deployed, because it's not just 9/11. Like, our guys had deployed since day one, training, whether it be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, on a different continent or wherever. So we started our military career with a high tempo of deployment. You know what I mean? Wasn't like after 9/11, things really changed a lot for us. It just, it was not training, it was war. So in that respect, it did change, but we had a close-knit community from the very start, and that does make a huge difference.
Sure does.
Also, you have to have a strong relationship with your spouse, obviously. Integration is very, very hard. Ours wasn't perfect ever. It was difficult at times, but if you have a solid foundation in your relationship, and with us, we have a strong religious upbringing, both of us. So, you lean on that, and you just, you pray and you hope for the best. And when you get back, you just try to integrate that person back into your family unit as quickly as possible, because like I said, we did have a high tempo of deployment in our units. So it was always like, all right, hurry up, let's get family things done, let's go on vacation, go to your kids' ball games or whatever, just to try to normalize your family life. So there's that good foundation when they deploy again, I guess. Also, I have a good family, my own personal family, my mom, my dad. I have a strong relationship with my siblings. So just with me, it was just a kind of not a substitute, but I had other people and other things to lean on when Don was gone. Mm-hmm. We stayed very involved. I know a lot of folks we met was like, we haven't been home in 5 years. And that shocked me. Like, I made a point to bring my children home to my parents, to Don's parents, even when Don wasn't around. So we had, our immediate family gave me strength as well. So, but again, it's not easy. It's not to say it didn't come with problems, even though I think we went into it with a very strong foundation. You can't isolate. You have to lean on your brothers and sisters in the military, and take what you can from them and give what you can. if
Do you
that
think
makes sense.
that you being in the military yourself helped to understand what he was going through at some level?
Absolutely did. And that's not to say that people who hadn't served couldn't understand as well, but understanding the structure, understanding that sometimes, you don't always know the full story, there's a lot of unknowns, and I was used to that. So I guess it just kind of like spilled over into our relationship in our family. When the units were gone, people would be frustrated. Well, we don't know this, we don't know that. And I was always like, well, no news is good news. You know what I mean?
Right.
It just gave me a different way of looking at it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I definitely think it helped.
Yeah. Well, I want to add a comment that most people see generals as very stoic, but your story includes real vulnerability. And I met you at a veterans luncheon, and I have to say I'm a hugger, and I was delightfully surprised at how, General, you were going around hugging people. I'm like, General, so I would perceive of a general being a hugger. You were such a hugger. That was so amazing to me, anyway.
Yes, I know that is a perception of general officers, and I try to keep that in mind, that, the higher you go in rank doesn't necessarily mean the more you need to distance yourself from people. I think it's the exact opposite. And to share that human quality with people and to make people feel comfortable who are otherwise intimidated by the rank and intimidated by the situation and uncomfortable. I've just found it better approach not to be stoic and aloof, and to be, friendly and warm and inviting and, engaging with the families and the people that you work with and those that you are meeting. I grew up in a home that was accepting of that, and so I learned it and I used it because I think that in the end it helps you make connections with people, because really relationships and connections is what it's all about. And the importance, the higher you go in whatever profession, the more in touch you are, I think you're able to do your job better. I was asked by a 4-star general one time. He said to me, he goes, "So you really don't listen to me all that much, do you?" And I was a subordinate general officer commander. And I said, "Yes, sir, I listen to you. I listen to your orders and your instructions and your guidance." But I think what you're getting at is the fact that I approach my job as to listening to the guy that's on the ground doing the job and promoting ideas and concepts that support them, and not the good ideas that come from the top down. We're too removed. We're in Stuttgart, Germany, and I have 6,000 service members in 28 different countries, an area 2.5 times the size of the United States, conducting operations. And my staff and your staff and the Special Operations Command staff in Tampa, the 2 4-star generals that I work for, are very disconnected from that. And so it's important to listen to the people that have to actually execute the mission and defaulting to them. If it's not illegal, immoral, or negligently unsafe, then there's no harm in endorsing the recommendations of your subordinates above those of your staff, and then making your staff work to get the support needed for what those commanders on the ground need. And so I think that approach is more effective. It's not listening. It's just a matter of perspective. I am not, and never have been, focused up. I've always been focused down. And I think that is something that is much more effective, particularly when you're in combat environments. So much on the line. And when someone gets killed and injured, I want to be able to look myself in the mirror and be able to say, I did and my staff did everything that we could in order to make sure that they had everything they needed. And that type of sacrifice wasn't a sacrifice that was made because, we weren't listening. We weren't paying attention. And so that was very, very important to me because I'm the one that has to write the letter. I'm the one that has to make the phone call.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one that has to look at the family. And I want to be able to look at them and say, hey, we did our best. And they gave the ultimate sacrifice, and or they got injured, whatever the circumstance might be. But know that your service member, that your family member had everything they needed in order to be, supported and successful in the environment that they were operating in. Nothing would hurt me more to send unprepared service members,
Mm-hmm.
ill-equipped and not ready for the mission, and then have something catastrophic happen.
It sounds like your faith, and as you were saying that Sharon, as you were saying that you're very faith-based, that was part of your guiding light, your higher purpose guiding you through that, really coming from a place of heart. A lot of our listeners are spiritually minded individuals and healers, and it sounds like that was kind of your presence was coming from truly from the heart with your service.
Well, yes, I think so. And, I have 4 pillars that I guided my life by, that I developed rather early: God, family, community, and country. And as I was a young leader, I was taught mission, 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 mission. Mission is the most important thing. Mission is the most important thing. You got to focus on the mission. But as I went up in rank, and particularly as I got more experience in combat, I realized, you know what? The mission is important. We have to get that done. But if you take care of the people and you take care of their families, then the mission will take care of itself. Mm. And so instead of mission, people, family, I changed that around to people, family, and mission. And I found that was a much more effective way to communicate, because it's the people that gets the missions done. It's the families that back them up. And that mission will get done. It will take care of itself. But you've got to be people focused in the type of profession that I served in, and they are the quintessential difference in winning and losing, in victory or in defeat. Mm-hmm. And so the focus on them is vital. And then I back that up with 3, I think, very important Bible verses. One was Isaiah 6:8, and the second was Psalms 1:3-1, and then Psalms 1:4-1. And I heard a voice of the Lord say, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional here. I apologize.
All right. I know you've often spoken about trauma, healing, and mental health within the military because of the trauma that they go through. Is there a message of hope that you wish every veteran and every family member of military could hear?
Well, yeah, their service, I heard a voice of the Lord say, whom shall we send? Who shall go for us? And I heard a voice say, here I am, send me. Mm-hmm. And that type of commitment that they gave to us is something that we can't forget when they have transitioned their service into becoming a veteran. And I think we lose that focus. And I think the statistics show in every way, the medical service that they get is not where it should be today. Mm-hmm. The high suicide rates, increasing suicide rates among our women veterans, the homelessness, the incarceration rates, the fact that, veterans will go through 3, 4, 5 jobs before they actually find something they want to do, if they find something that they can land on that gives them that purpose and motivation and direction that they once had, that they're looking to fulfill. And, Psalms 1:3 speaks to that, because it says, how good and pleasing it is when men and women dwell together as one. And that's the togetherness that we learned in the military, that we thrive to see once we get out of the military, that we struggle to find. And then 1441 is about preparation. Praise the Lord, my rock, who prepares my hands for battle and my fingers for war. That's all about preparation. That's all about being ready for anything that comes your way and being able to deal with it. And when you're in the military and when you've experienced trauma, however you experience it, that can be difficult to deal with. And, to be able to fall back on tried and true pillars, God and family, that community, that means the most. The community solves most of our problems. We're trying to solve problems for people at too high a level when we need to focus on solving the problems at the lowest level, at the community level, where they understand them and know what is needed in order to be able to solve them. And then that will result in, a nation and a country that is strong and true to its values and principles, which are, I think, today, almost in peril because people just don't understand them. They're not taught them. They're not taught to live them. And so therefore, these principles of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the hard work, don't tread on me, our government institutions that have become too bureaucratic and not focused on the service to the country to ensure that we are of the people, by the people, and for the people, as our Constitution says and supports. And the further we get away from that, I think the more disconnected those of us that sign the dotted line to give our lives up for that become a little disillusioned. And that has, a very significant impact.
That's right. Because when you're in the military, you are surrounded by a community. And when you transition out, you're oftentimes alone. Even the wives. Sharon, what was your experience as he was transitioning out of the military? That had to affect you as well.
I'm popping in here for a minute.
Yay!
So actually, I told Don that was the hardest year of our military career, was our transition year. You may not always know people when you go to a different military base, but it's the commonality of you're all serving, the routine. You know what I mean? It's the same, but just in a different location. Our transition year, when we retired, we didn't have children at home anymore. Our adult children our youngest was graduating college. So you don't have that connection to the community, that you would need. So even when we lived in a smaller military community and couldn't live on the base, we lived in a town that we could fit in because we had kids that played sports in the schools or whatever, band, whatever it was, that common piece, right? If you retire from the military, you're generally 50 or so, depending on when you got started. That's a hard time to transition. You don't have a common, you don't even have like if you are a church person, you don't even have the church community you've been involved in, so you come into a completely strange area. And then you don't have that structure of the military. It's very daunting. It is, even for a seasoned couple like us, who had done 30 years together in the military and had moved, 16 times or whatever.
Wow.
That move after retirement was the most difficult.
Wow.
And I don't know if there's an answer or an easy solution to what makes that easier, but I will just say it's common and it can be very difficult for people who already feel alone. You know what I mean? And now they're in a community where, especially ours in New England, we don't have a military base really near us. So that whole idea is kind of foreign anyway. When you talk in a big community like say Fayetteville, North Carolina, for instance, usually you can talk to someone who has experienced it personally and knows somebody who's in the military.
Right.
So everything you talk about is familiar to them. When you come back to a community like ours in small town New Hampshire, and you talk about your military life, people look at you kind of like, what are you talking about? So yeah, it's very lonely. You have to figure it out pretty quickly. And again, like I said, if you have a relationship that's not as strong as maybe it could be, you're going to feel it a lot worse. And then, sadly, a lot of military folks transition and they find themselves without a spouse. I mean, at our point in our lives, we know a lot of people who are divorced. The military is hard on marriage, and it's sad, but it happens. And we could probably count on both hands how many of our original friends are still together. So I mean, I work with a 501c3 organization in New Hampshire that helps transitioning veterans with things like furniture, and I get to talk to those veterans all the time. Nice. So I understand that that's a very common issue or concern, but I can also talk from experience and tell them, well, even at our level, it's still hard. Like, it's not easier, even though you have a little rank under your belt or whatever. And that was always my thing. I'll go back a little bit to what you said about the prior service or being enlisted and then an officer. If I ran into roadblocks, it's made me stop and think, if I am struggling like this and my husband is a commander of a big unit here, like, what is this specialist's wife? How is she handling it? I'm not getting the answers, and my husband's a lieutenant colonel. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's what always gave me pause and really had empathy for our families, because I knew the struggle was real at every level. And I could just imagine what it was like when you didn't have rank. You couldn't pick up the phone and call, the commander and say, hey, bail me out or help me out with this, or
right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just was thinking about that as you were asking Don the question about how that had shaped his career later on. But as a spouse and supporting the families, it really gave me pause, to think, wow, they must really be struggling if it's hard for me,
And you're right. Moving, coming from the military into a community that they have no concept of what it's like. What would you say is the most misunderstood part of being a military spouse?
I don't know if I've ever been asked that before. So, Don's looking at me like I should know an answer.
That your service isn't as valued as the military service members. That is a big problem.
As a spouse, you're saying?
Yeah.
Could you ask me the question one more time?
That's okay. What would you say? Because I watched my mother go through exactly what you're talking about too. Even though we moved, it was always community. You're right. It was different, but it was the same. There was at that era, it was the commissary, the PX. You learn your way around the base.
That's right.
And then when you went into the civilian life, there was no support. There was no support for her, and people didn't understand what it was like to be constantly on the move. I mean, she had to up and move every time he got deployed or got moved or changed. The whole world was constantly being uprooted and moved. People don't understand. I mean, I know so many people who've born and raised in the same community.
Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah.
And so they have no concept of what it's like to be a military wife. So what do you think is the most misunderstood for them, that the most misunderstood part of being a spouse?
Oof. Like Don was saying, I think that's a good, valid point, but I'm not sure. Like he said, the fact that the spouse is not the one serving. So they get that your like husband or wife or whatever is a service person and has to deal with certain things, but you're the spouse. So they don't, I don't know. How do you help me out here, Don? He's always better with words than I am. Well, like even for career wise, I will tell you, this was my struggle. Was you meet people who aren't in the military and they're like, oh, what do you do? It's like, well, I'm a military spouse, because that in and of itself is a full-time job.
It sure is.
It really is. Mm-hmm. And yes, I'm a nurse too. I have not been able to work on a career as a nurse you know, because of moving, relocating, deployments. I mean, to me, I was the only constant in my children's life.
100%.
I was not going to leave them to, you know, to be raised or to be looked after by someone else. That was just my choice. But now as an adult, like older adult, oh, you retired? You know, well, my husband's retired. You know, it's just a weird conversation, you know, because I'm speaking always in terms of what he and I did as a military couple.
Right.
And it's not really about what I did or who I am. Right. So I think this
is what I think. I don't think the military spouse that spends an entire career in the military with their husband gets the credit that they deserve for an equal amount of service, but in a different capacity. And it goes back to my idea of people, family, and mission. And without that, I can tell you, without the support of Sharon, without her being the backbone of the family, and without her doing the things she did to raise our children and do it consistently with the way we both believed our children should be raised, even in my absence, is noteworthy. And it's something that I think is overlooked. For instance, in order for my wife to get 55% of my retirement, which she spent serving with me, you know, we had to purchase from, you know, the government a very expensive insurance policy, so that if I die before I'm 85 years old, she can get 55% of my retirement salary. And I think that's wrong. I think there should be no doubt, there should be no question that my retirement should transition to her so that she can maintain a quality of life that she earned. And I think it's wrong. And I think we make those statements by the way, you know, we treat the spouses when the service member is no longer there or the service member transitions. And I think there's a certain amount of, you know, loyalty, and there's a certain amount of, you know, other benefits that they have earned, and we don't look at it that way. And so
if you think about it, they're signing on the dotted line too.
They very much are. And you know, they're going to lose you, right? I mean, you're the one that you know, they're sending off, that, you know, may not come home, or when you come home different. And then there's a whole set of challenges there that both Sharon and I experienced as a military officer, you know, in charge of, you know, battalions, brigades at division level. And, you know, I mean, I recognized that after, you know, 10 tours in Afghanistan, being, you know, wounded twice, numerous gunfights, losing 72 service members, that I, you know, was responsible for over those tours, you know, that had an effect. And I know I had post-traumatic stress. And I know that on 2 occasions I experienced a, you know, mild traumatic brain injury, and that I had physical injuries that I didn't take care of them because it was more important to stay in the fight. And, you know, this quiet suffering, you know, takes a toll. And I know it took a toll on my family. And, you know, my first deployment in Afghanistan was 2001, the beginning, and my last was ended June of 2013, and then I went to Africa for 4 years, and then I retired. So, but it wasn't until 2015 that I started to deal with the problems of post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury and you know, physical injury. And I went for help, but I was a coward about it. Sharon insisted that I went for help, and it was kind of a condition for the continuance of our relationship. And so I did it because she's important to me and my family's important to me. And I realized that, yeah, I was not as functional mentally and physically and spiritually as I should be. So I went to Landstuhl. I met a nurse who introduced me to a program, and we kept it under the radar because I was a general. And, although the military at that time had enough programs for mental health that you couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting one, right?
Sure.
But they weren't effective. The whole process wasn't effective. And it did have a negative impact on your career, and everybody knew it. So they didn't tell the truth about their injuries, and they hid them to the detriment of, their career in some circumstances because they got in trouble with drugs and alcohol, or the family because
they hid them. They thought they were hiding them, but Sharon saw that there was something changed.
Yes, you weren't hiding it.
Yeah.
You really weren't hiding it from anybody because your people felt it, and your family felt it, and you put yourself through the ringer. And so I realized in 2015 that I had a higher responsibility, and I said, if a general can't take care of themselves, they have no business taking care of anybody else. So I said, this is it. I am going to come forward. I'm going to tell everybody that will listen that I have been dealing with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury and physical ailments, and that I have, gone through almost a 2-year protocol to get myself better mentally, physically, and spiritually, and it works. And so as the Special Operations Commander for Africa, I went to my Deputy Commander and my Chief of Staff and my Senior Enlisted Advisor, Master Chief Puglisi, and I said, hey, listen, we got to do something, because I don't think that the problems that we're having inside our unit with discipline has anything to do with the fact that we have bad soldiers. And I think it has to do with the fact that we have soldiers that we're not taking care of mentally, physically, and spiritually.
They're wounded. That's the problem with the mental, emotional wounding. You don't, you see a broken arm and it's in a cast, and everybody can feel sorry for you because, you broke your arm. That right. Physical injury is oftentimes, it's devastating, but it's apparent. People don't see that mental, emotional trauma, that woundedness, and then there's a stigma that's attached to it, and that's truly a shame, and hopefully is being changed. That's kind of your new mission now, isn't it? Now that
right. Well, that's what it transitioned to, because we put together a very effective program that inside Special Operations Command Africa, and it became very well known.
Wow.
But at the same time was a source of conflict with my superiors, and I was actually told by one general officer above me that if I continued to do this, it would have a negative effect on my career, which it did. But I said, hey, it's more important to me that we take care of our service members and their families than it is to get another star. And if that's my fate, then that's my fate. And so it became my mission. And there's a New York Times article that was posted in 2015 that highlighted this, and that's what put the magnifying glass on it, and that's what created friction with my higher chain of command. But the benefits of what we did after 26 months, after we studied it, after we found that we had a serious problem with drug and alcohol problems while guys were deployed onto the continent, reduced to almost nothing.
Wow.
Sexual harassment in the workplace went to nothing. I mean, zero, down to nothing. People were misbehaving because they weren't thinking clearly, because they were taking things and doing things that just weren't right. Their problems at home were lack of engagement and involvement in the family because they isolated themselves, and so we were able to really turn that around. And unfortunately, when I left, the program was terminated by the incoming commander. So much to the dismay of service members who contacted me and told me about what had happened. But we took that and into retirement, and we did our level best to help people. We think that we had a significant impact, not only in New Hampshire and in New England, but across the country. And we were on national programs. We traveled everywhere, and we didn't take any money. We don't take any money for any of this. I don't I sit on many boards and I don't take money. I won't take money to help veterans. I won't take money to do what I inherently think is my responsibility to do because I was given so much. And so what needs to be done is, everything that we do raise, everything that we do earn, everything that we do learn needs to go directly to supporting the veteran and not be sidetracked because the person doing it gets a benefit, right? My benefit at the end of the day is knowing that we saved somebody's life, we saved somebody's marriage, invested in the future, we saved somebody's grandfather or grandmother or aunt and uncle, son, daughter.
Children and their children.
Yes, son and daughter.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So, we continue to do that. It's very, very important to us, that we stay engaged and that I use every ounce of my influence, my rank as a general, to get things done on behalf of others. And, you think it wouldn't be hard, but it is hard and it is difficult. And there are, obstacles almost everywhere you turn, but those obstacles through persistence and perseverance can be breached. And that's what we do.
So what do you see in our country right now? Where do you feel we're headed in our country with all these challenges that we're having with our military and other things? And what are your thoughts about what hope do you have for our country right now?
Well, I think that we have a leadership crisis in our country, and I've thought it for a long time, and I've written about it. Then when I was in the military, I wrote about the crisis of leadership that we have, and it's permeated every aspect in our government, whether it's Congress, doesn't matter if it's the executive branch or it's the legislative branch, the military, those that lead our departments. I think we have a crisis of leadership, and I believe in our institutions. I believe that our institutions can be strong, but they're only going to be as effective those that are leading them. And I look at the military, for instance, and I think the senior leaders in the military, and I'm worried about it, are chameleons, and they're political chameleons. They change their colors based off of the predominant political view of the administration that's in charge, whether it's a Democrat-led or Republican-led, it doesn't matter. They will change their perspective and their views in order to keep their job and to continue to move up the chain of command. And the Democrats don't get it all wrong, and the Republicans don't get it all wrong, and neither of them get it all right. But there is a right. And that's where we have to stand, regardless of the politics. Mm-hmm. I call it following the example of General George Catlett Marshall, who didn't play politics, who stayed true to what was right and what was wrong. And, the Constitution, the values of the nation, the people of our nation all came first, and then the men and women that we serve all came first. Everything else came second. And he stayed true to that, and he held the president in Congress to that standard, and we don't see that anymore. And I think that is, extremely dangerous because we've tied it to upward mobility, we've tied it to success, we've tied it to social media humiliation. Nobody wants to be humiliated on social media, but that's kind of the danger. And, we have to stand our ground, right, wrong, or indifferent. And I think nobody is doing that now. And I think this crisis of leadership we have in our country is one of the most internal dangers to the forward progress of our country. The failure to admit when you're wrong, the failure to admit when you make a mistake, the failure to give people credit where credit's due, regardless of who they are or where they come from. The lack of disrespect, the divisiveness that's been created in our nation today, you feel it everywhere you go. I think it's hugely dangerous. I just don't recall that. And my wife and I talk about it a lot, and we talk about it with other folks. I didn't feel that when I was growing up. I didn't feel the divisiveness. Is it going to be perfect? No, but we always fell back on our institutions that gave us the right correction. That's not happening now, and it hasn't been happening for a long time. And we have to get back to really our roots and dedicating ourselves to the Constitution and how that, the fundamental belief in that the people are the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And that everything is based off of that, and that we have a government that's, there to serve, and that, power and money is not the most important thing. And I think we've got ourselves on a road that's a bit precarious, and we need leadership to change that.
So if you could offer one message of hope from both of your heads, you both working together, what would it be?
Well, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution is all about hope. Mm-hmm. And it's all about, I just wish people would read the 1,500 words in the Declaration of Independence and actually understand them, and the 4,500 words in the Constitution, and really understand those, because that's where our hope lies. Right. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The idea that we're supposed to believe in something bigger than ourselves and commit ourselves to that. And the service of others. We need public service, not self-service. We need people that are willing, to put, things on the line that are bigger than ourselves. And I think the hope I have is every time I look into the eyes of my grandchildren, is I am looking at them, and I am trying to instill in them, as my sons are and their wives, these kind of values. And, this upcoming generation is, where we need to look for hope, and we need to teach them, about these things. And we need, more importantly, to set the example. I tell this story a lot. During COVID, my grandchildren were living with us because my son his business had gone under because of the COVID restrictions. And so him and his wife and our 3 grandchildren had to move in with us. And as a matter of fact, that happened to all my boys. And, they worked their way out of it. And, now they're, standing on their own 2 feet, and it's all good. But I see that as a product of the value system that we put in them. Hey, it's not failure unless you accept it. You just got to keep moving forward. Well, one day I was on a Zoom call with a young soldier that I was mentoring. And, I was talking about how I want to be remembered, and I want to be remembered as a good man. And I said, if the writing on the stone that sits above me on the ground says he was a good man, then I was successful. And if people think that I was a good man, then I would be successful. And one day I was walking my grandson down to the bus, and we were talking, and he was 5 years old at the time. And I said to him, so what do you want to be when you grow up? You give that any thought? And you're only 5, but, let's hear it. And at 5 years old, you're thinking you're going to hear, I want to be Batman or Superman or
Fireman.
Sharon says he was 7. So I stand corrected. He was 7. And so he thought about it for a minute. He looked up at me and he goes, Bubba, I want to be a good man. And I thought to myself, where did he hear that? And I realized that in my office, in front of my desk, he was coloring in a coloring book, listening to every word I said. And that's where I realized. And it was I guess I relearned it. The impact that our actions and our words have on children. And so if we want hope and we want to change things, we have to invest in the upcoming generation, and we have to instill in them values that are going to make a difference. And that's where I'm putting my hope right now.
Sharon?
Well, no, you don't need to. was like, you don't need to move it over here.
Mhm.
No, he's spot on. Honestly, that's, yeah, I do the same thing. I look to my grandkids, and you want to leave them a better place, than we have, or at least equally, an equal place that we have lived in, and fortune that we have had, whether it be the fortune of love or, actual money, success. But anyway, yeah, I would agree that we put our hope in the next generation, even our kids. I mean, they're still learning and growing, even though they're adults. I didn't know everything when I was 26, right? So they even have a lot to learn. So just don't stop teaching or think that you have an impact, because you always are making an impact on their lives, even as adults, I think. So
Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here.
Of course.
Any last thoughts about what is lighting you up these days? Are there projects or passions, or what brings you joy? Here we are moving into the holiday season. Is there something that brings you joy for the season?
I would say this year, as true every year, I don't need any Christmas decorations at this point in my life, right? I have totes and totes and totes. Well, but I don't even know where I was. There was a little square, just tiny, like this big, and it said, "It's not what's under the tree." Now I can get emotional because this is very important to me. It's not what's under the tree that's important, but who's around the tree. So, and then I'm going to pass it to Don before I get emotional. There we go.
So, Don, what's lighting you up these days?
Well, I think it's my good health. I think it's the fact that I've been able to find a second career in law enforcement and, serving people. I enjoy going to work as a police officer with the perspective of who can I help? How many people can I help? How can I impact people's lives positively? Law enforcement isn't just about making arrests. It isn't just about writing tickets and stopping cars and enforcing laws. It's about making a difference in people's lives. It's about engaging the community and being an example to others, in that way of, servant leadership. So that really has, I think, really given me, an extra boost of energy. Many of your viewers probably don't know that I did run for the United States Senate, that I did win the Republican primary. But that was probably one of the most troubling things that I did in my entire life. And if I had rested my impressions on people and situations and circumstances as a result of that experience, I would be a very sad person today. But I didn't. I looked for a way to serve, and a way to impact people positively. And I was grateful to be asked to run, but I didn't have any idea what I was getting into. And
I could only imagine.
It was very, very disappointing and very hurtful. So
people are cruel.
Now that I have found this new career and I have the support of Sharon once again, I worked on Thanksgiving, I'm going to work on Christmas, and we're just adjusting our schedules to accommodate my work hours, and we celebrated Thanksgiving accordingly, and we'll celebrate Christmas accordingly. But I think that really has had, it's allowed me to really, kind of be hopeful, right? As many problems as there are out there, I get an opportunity to help people every time I go to work.
Yeah. Thank you for your service. Thank you for our freedom. Thank you for everything you have done in the military and beyond. So thank you, Sharon, for being there to support him, for your service, because I truly know that it's the woman behind the man, especially in service. And there are women in the service and their husbands support them as well. So
absolutely,
it's a partnership. It truly is a partnership. And so thank you for being here and sharing your art, your story, and your inspiration.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Lois,
You're welcome.
for what you do, bringing these stories forward. I am, and I know Sharon feels the same way. We're very humbled to be asked. We don't think our story is special. We're happy to share it. And if it can help one person, because we say one veteran at a time,
That's right.
then it's worth it. So thank you for this opportunity. We certainly do appreciate it.
You're so welcome. And I often end with a little quote that I came up with. Until next time, look up, stay positive, and be the light in someone's day.
Amen.
God bless.